My ranch was supposed to be my sanctuary, not a battlefield where my grandchildren's lives hung by a thread. But when the HOA turned my fields into a smuggling ring for exotic Karen flowers, I learned justice never retires. The air was thick with betrayal that summer, the kind that clings to your skin like sweat. I stood on my porch, a retired federal judge at 68, staring at the horizon where my land-me legacy had been twisted into something sinister. The Karen flowers, those deceptively delicate blooms with their crimson petals and intoxicating scent, weren't just plants. They were the currency of a cruel conspiracy, one that had stolen my daughter's children and turned my ranch into a prison. It started with a letter, slipped under my door at dawn. "Stay out of the HOA's business, Judge Hawthorne, or your grandkids pay the price." The words were scrawled in jagged ink, like the writer had pressed the pen through the paper. My daughter, Emily, had been missing for 2 weeks, her kids Lila, 10, and Ethan, 7 vanished with her. The sheriff called it a runaway case, but I knew better. Emily was no quitter. She'd been fighting the HOA's iron grip on our rural Montana community, their endless rules about what we could grow, who could live here, what we could say. They'd turned our quiet valley into a dictatorship, and those damn flowers were at the heart of it. I'd spent 30 years on the bench, staring down murderers and mob bosses, but nothing prepared me for this. The HOA wasn't just a bunch of busybodies with clipboards. They were a front, using the Karen flowers rare, addictive, and worth millions on the black market to fund their control. My ranch, with its sprawling acres and hidden valleys, was their perfect cover. And I, Judge Elias Hawthorne, was their biggest threat. That morning, I drove my old pickup to the edge of my property, where the Karen fields glowed like a wound under the rising sun. I spotted Clara, the HOA president, her sleek blonde hair tied back, clipboard in hand, directing a group of workers. They weren't locals. Hardened men with cold eyes, unloading crates stamped with foreign symbols. Clara saw me and froze, her smile as fake as the flower's innocence. "Judge Hawthorne," she called, her voice syrupy but sharp, "you're up early." "Where are my grandkids, Clara?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. My voice was gravel, worn from years of courtroom battles. "And don't lie. I've seen enough liars to spot one from a mile away." Her smile twitched. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you should check with Emily. She's the one who ran off, isn't she?" The workers stopped, their hands hovering over the crates, eyes darting between us. I felt the weight of their stares, the threat in their silence. I stepped closer, my boots crunching the dry earth. "You think you can scare me? I've put men in prison for less than what you're hiding. Those flowers aren't just plants, and we both know it. Tell me where Lila and Ethan are, or I'll tear this operation apart." Clara's eyes narrowed, but before she could speak, a scream cut through the air. It was Emily. I'd know her voice anywhere, raw and desperate, coming from the barn at the edge of the field. My heart lurched. I ran, ignoring Clara's shout to stop, my bad knee screaming with every step. The barn doors were bolted, but I threw my shoulder against them, wood splintering under my weight. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying scent of Karen flowers, their pollen stinging my eyes. Emily was there, tied to a chair, her face bruised but fierce. Lila and Ethan were huddled in a corner, bound, their eyes wide with fear. A man stood over them, tall and wiry, with a scar slicing his cheek. He held a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light filtering through the barn's slats. "Judge," he sneered, his voice thick with an accent I couldn't place. "You're a long way from your courtroom." "Let them go," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "You don't know who you're dealing with." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Elias Hawthorne. Retired judge, widower, stubborn as hell. But you're out of your depth. These flowers, they're worth more than your life, and your family's just collateral." Emily strained against her ropes, her eyes locked on mine. Dad, they're smuggling the flowers through the ranch. The HOA's been using the kids to keep me quiet. They'll kill us all if you don't stop them. The man stepped forward, his knife inches from Ethan's throat. My grandson whimpered, and it took every ounce of my will not to charge him. You talk too much, Emily, he said. The judge needs to learn his place. I raised my hands, palms out, buying time. You think you can run this game on my land? I've spent decades dismantling operations like yours. You're not the first to underestimate me. Clara burst into the barn behind me, her composure gone. Enough, Marco, she snapped at the man. We don't need a mess. Let's make a deal, Judge. Walk away, forget what you saw, and your family lives. I looked at Emily, at the fire in her eyes despite the bruises. At Lila and Ethan, so small, so brave. I thought of the years I'd spent upholding the law, the lives I'd protected, the justice I'd fought for. This wasn't just my ranch. It was my family, my blood. And no Onino HOA, no smuggler, no flower was going to take that from me. No deal, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a gavel. You've got one chance to let them go, or I'll bury you in ways you can't imagine. Marco's grin widened, his knife glinting as he pressed it closer to Ethan. Big words, old man. Let's see if you can back them up. The air in the barn seemed to tighten, every second stretching into eternity. I knew I had no weapon, no backup, just my wits and a lifetime of facing down monsters. But I wasn't just a judge anymore. I was a grandfather, and that made me dangerous in ways they'd never see coming. The barn's air was suffocating, thick with the sweet poison of Karen flowers and the metallic tang of fear. Marco's knife hovered at Ethan's throat, a glint of steel that held my world hostage. My grandson's eyes, wide and pleading, locked onto mine, and I felt the weight of every case I'd ever judged crash down on me. 30 years on the bench, I'd faced killers, but none had held my family's lives in their hands. My mind raced, calculating every move like I was back in the courtroom, only this time, the stakes were blood. Marco, I said, my voice low, deliberate, you're making a mistake. You think that knife gives you power? It makes you desperate. And desperate men make sloppy choices. His scar twitched as he smirked, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Sloppy? You're the one with nothing, Judge. No gun, no badge, just a bad knee and a big mouth. Clara stepped forward, her heels clicking on the barn's wooden floor. Enough posturing, Elias. You're not in a courtroom. You can't talk your way out of this. Walk away, and we let your daughter and her brats live. Keep pushing, and we'll bury them in your precious fields. Emily thrashed against her ropes, her voice raw. Don't listen to her, Dad. They're lying. They'll kill us anyway. The flowers theory, not just drugs. They're using the pollen to control people, to make them compliant. The whole valley's under their thumb. Marco's grin faltered, and he shot Clara a look. That was my opening. I'd spent decades reading faces: jurors, defendants, liars. Clara's polished facade was cracking, and Marco's bravado was a mask for nerves. They weren't as united as they seemed. I stepped closer, ignoring the ache in my knee, my hand still raised to keep Marco's focus on me. Control. I said, loud enough for the workers outside to hear through the barn's open door. That's what this is about. You're not just smuggling flower theory, poisoning my neighbors, turning them into puppets. And you thought I wouldn't notice? I've been watching your little operation for weeks. It was a bluff, but a good one. I'd only pieced together the HOA's scheme in the last few days, after finding strange tire tracks on my land and overhearing whispers at the general store about special deliveries. But Marco didn't know that. His grip on the knife loosened slightly, and I pressed harder. You're not the mastermind here, are you, Marco? Clara's calling the shots. What's she paying you to risk your neck? Or are you just another pawn in her game? Shut up, Clara snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Marco, don't listen to him. He's stalling. But Marco's eyes darted to her, and I saw the fracture widen. Is that true, Clara? You using me like you used these kids? His knife wavered, no concenter of Ethan's throat, a fraction of an inch, but enough for me to notice. I seized the moment. You're not the boss here, Marco. She's playing you, just like she played the whole valley. Those flowers are her empire, not yours. What happens when she doesn't need you anymore? Enough. Clara lunged forward, grabbing a shovel from the barn wall. She swung it at me, but I ducked, the metal grazing my shoulder with a dull thud. Pain flared, but I didn't stop. I charged at Marco, tackling him before he could react. We hit the ground hard, the knife skidding across the floor. Ethan screamed, and Lila's cries echoed in my ears as I wrestled for control. Marco was younger, stronger, but I was fueled by something he'd never understand: family. I drove my elbow into his jaw, feeling the crack of bone against bone. He grunted, dazed, and I rolled off him, scrambling for the knife. Emily shouted, "Dad, behind you." Clara's shovel came down again, but I twisted, catching the blow on my arm. The pain was blinding, but I managed to grab the shovel's handle and yank it from her hands. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock. "You're done, Clara," I growled, tossing the shovel aside and grabbing the knife. Marco was back on his feet, blood trickling from his lip. "You're a dead man, Judge." He pulled a gun from his belt, and my heart stopped. I hadn't seen that coming. The barn's dim light glinted off the barrel as he aimed at my chest. "Stop." Emily's voice was a desperate scream. "Marco, don't. You'll bring the whole valley down on you." He hesitated, and I saw my chance. I dove at him, the knife in my hand slashing across his wrist. The gun fell, and I kicked it toward Emily, who'd managed to loosen her ropes. She grabbed it, her hands shaking but her aim steady as she pointed it at Marco. "Untie the kids," I told her, keeping my eyes on Clara and Marco. Emily worked quickly, freeing Lila and Ethan, who ran to her, sobbing. I kept the knife raised, my voice cold. "Clara, tell your men to stand down. This is over." "You idiot," Clara spat, her composure gone. "You think you can stop this? The HOA owns this valley. The flowers are everywhere, your neighbors, your friends, they're all addicted. You can't fight that." "Maybe not," I said, stepping closer, the knife steady in my grip. "But I can start with you." The barn door burst open, and one of the workers stormed in, a rifle in his hands. "Boss, we got company," he shouted. "Sheriff's pulling up." Clara's face paled, but she laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "You think the sheriff's on your side? He's been eating out of my hand for years." But I knew something she didn't. Sheriff Daniels was an old friend, and he'd been suspicious of the HOA for months. I'd called him last night, after finding those tire tracks, and told him to keep an eye on my ranch. If he was here, it wasn't to save Clara. "Game's up," I said, my voice calm despite the pounding in my chest. "You underestimated this valley. And you underestimated me." The sheriff's voice boomed from outside. "Clara, Marco, come out with your hands up. We've got the place surrounded." Marco cursed, grabbing Clara's arm as if to flee, but Emily fired a warning shot into the barn's ceiling, the sound deafening. "Don't move," she said, her voice like steel. Lila and Ethan clung to her, their faces buried in her sides. Clara's eyes darted between me, Emily, and the open door. For the first time, she looked scared. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. "The flowers, the smuggling, it's all hearsay." I smiled, a grim, tired smile. "You forget who I am, Clara. I've spent 30 years building cases against people like you. I've got evidence, those crates, the tire tracks, the pollen samples I sent to the state lab. You're done. The sheriff stormed in with 2 deputies, their guns drawn. Elias, you okay? Daniels called, his eyes scanning the scene. Been better, I said, lowering the knife but keeping my gaze on Clara. Get these 2 out of here. And check the crates outside. You'll find more than flowers. As the deputies cuffed Clara and Marco, Emily rushed to me, the kids still clinging to her. Dad, I thought, her voice broke, and she threw her arms around me, Lila and Ethan joining her. I held them tight, the knife clattering to the floor as the weight of it all hit me. They were safe. My family was safe. But it wasn't over. As the sheriff led Clara and Marco away, I caught her final glare, a promise of vengeance. The Karen flowers were still out there, their pollen woven into the valley's air, its people. I'd won this battle, but the war was just beginning. We stepped out into the blinding sunlight, the ranch sprawling before us, its fields both a crime scene and a home. Emily squeezed my hand. What now, Dad? I looked at the Karen flowers, their crimson petals swaying in the breeze like a taunt. Now we take back our valley, I said. 1 flower at a time. The sheriff's trucks kicked up dust as they hauled Clara and Marco away. You think this is over, Judge? Clara's voice echoed from the back of the squad car, sharp and venomous. The flowers are in your blood now. You'll never be free. Her words hung in the air like the Karen pollen, invisible but heavy, settling into the cracks of my resolve. I stood with Emily and the kids, watching the red taillights disappear down the dirt road. My ranch felt like a stranger's land now, its fields tainted by secrets I'd been too blind to see. Emily's hand trembled in mine, her face still bruised but her eyes fierce. Dad, she's not wrong. The HOA's got roots everywhere. The neighbors, the store, even the church theory all hooked on those flowers. Lila and Ethan clung to her, their small bodies shaking, and I felt a pang of guilt for dragging them into this war. But I'd been a judge too long to believe in clean victories. Justice was messy, and this fight was far from done. I turned to the barn, where deputies were cataloging crates of Karen flowers, their crimson petals spilling like blood across the ground. We start here, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Burn the flowers. Every last one. Dad, that's evidence, Emily warned, glancing at the sheriff, who was barking orders into his radio. Evidence won't save this valley, I replied. Those flowers are a poison, and I'm not letting them spread any further. I grabbed a can of kerosene from the barn's corner, the same one I'd used to light bonfires for the kids on summer nights. The irony wasn't lost on Mimi's sanctuary was now a battlefield, and I was about to set it ablaze. Sheriff Daniels caught my arm. Elias, hold on. We need to do this by the book. The feds are on their way. They'll want samples, records, everything. I met his gaze, my old friend's weathered face lined with worry. Daniels, you know as well as I do that the feds won't move fast enough. The HOA's got money, connections. They'll bury this case in red tape unless we force their hand. I jerked my arm free and started dousing the crates, the kerosene's sharp scent cutting through the flowers' sickly sweetness. Emily hesitated, then grabbed another can, joining me. You're right, she said, her voice thick with resolve. For Lila and Ethan. For everyone they've hurt. The kids watched, wide-eyed, as we soaked the crates, the pollen stinging our eyes like a final taunt. I struck a match, the flame flickering in the evening breeze, and tossed it onto the pile. The fire roared to life, consuming the Karen flowers in a blaze of heat and light. Black smoke curled into the sky, carrying the valley's secrets with it. But Clara's words gnawed at me. The flowers were everywhere, not just in crates but in gardens, homes, even the air we breathed. The valley's people were addicted, their minds dulled by the pollen's subtle grip. I'd seen it in the blank stares at town meetings, the way folks nodded along to the HOA's rules without question. This wasn't just a smuggling ring, it was a takeover, and my ranch was ground zero. As the fire burned, a crowd gathered, neighbors, drawn by the smoke and the sheriff's lights. Their faces were a mix of confusion and anger, some clutching Karen flowers like talismans. "What's going on, Judge?" called Mrs. Larson, the postmistress, her hands trembling as she held a bouquet. "Why are you burning our flowers?" "They're not yours," I said, stepping forward, the fire's heat at my back. "The HOA's been using these flowers to control you, to make you docile while they run their empire. They kidnapped my grandkids to keep us quiet. How many of you have lost something to them? Time, freedom, your own thoughts." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but not everyone was convinced. Tom Hargrove, a burly farmer who'd always towed the HOA's line, pushed forward. "You're full of it, Hawthorne. Those flowers bring in money. They're saving this valley." "Saving it?" Emily snapped, stepping beside me, the gun still in her hand. "They beat me, Tom. They tied up my kids. You think that's salvation?" She held up the worn photo of Lila and Ethan, her voice breaking. "This is what they do to anyone who fights back." The crowd shifted, unease spreading like the fire behind us. I saw doubt in their eyes, but also fear of losing the flowers, of facing a truth too ugly to bear. I'd seen that look in courtrooms, in defendants who knew they were guilty but clung to denial. "You've all felt it," I said, raising my voice. "The haze, the way you agree to things you'd never stomached before. That's the pollen. It's in your lungs, your blood. You're not free." A woman in the back sobbed, clutching her child. Another man dropped his flowers, staring at them like they'd bitten him. But Tom wasn't swayed. "You're a washed-up judge stirring up trouble," he growled, stepping closer. "You think you can burn our livelihood and walk away?" Before I could answer, a gunshot cracked the air. Everyone froze. Emily had fired into the ground, her hands steady now. "Back off, Tom," she said. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about all of you." Daniel stepped in, his badge glinting in the firelight. "She's right. We've got evidence crates, records, witnesses. The HOA's done. Help us, or you're complicit." His words hit hard, and the crowd's anger began to fracture. Some turned away, ashamed. Others stayed, their eyes on the burning crates, as if waking from a dream. But the victory felt hollow. As the fire died down, leaving charred petals and ash, I saw Lila and Ethan's faces, still pale with fear. Emily hugged them close, but her eyes met mine, and I knew she felt it too, the weight of what we'd lost. The ranch was ours again, but it would never be the same. The valley was waking up, but at what cost? That night, we sat in my kitchen, the kids asleep upstairs. Emily poured coffee, her hands still shaking. "What happens now, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We rebuild," I said, though the words felt heavy. "We clean the valley, root out every last flower, every last trace of their poison. But it won't be easy. Clara's got friends, and they won't let this go." She nodded, staring into her cup. "I should have fought harder, sooner. I let them take my kids." I reached across the table, gripping her hand. "You fought like hell, Emily. You kept them alive. That's what matters." But as I said it, Clara's final words echoed in my mind. "You'll never be free." I thought of the valley, its people, the pollen still lingering in the air. I thought of the years I'd spent upholding justice, only to find it twisted in my own backyard. I'd saved my family, but the fight had stripped us bare, left us raw and wounded. The next morning, I walked the ranch, the fields now scarred with ash. A single Karen flower lay untouched, its petals defiant against the dawn. I crushed it under my boot, but I knew it wasn't enough. The HOA's roots ran deep, and their poison was in us all. I was a judge, a grandfather, a man who'd thought he could retire from the world's ugliness. But the world had found me, and there was no stepping back. Emily joined me, Lila and Ethan trailing behind. "We'll fight, Dad," she said, her voice steady now. "For them. For us." I nodded, my heart heavy but resolute. The ranch was ours, but so was the war. And I'd fight it until my last breath, because that's what family does.